Once upon a time, through that destiny that overrules the gods, Cupid himself once gave up his immortal heart to a mortal maiden, and this is how it came to pass. There was a certain king who had 3 beautiful daughters. The 2 elder married princes of great renown, but Psyche, the youngest, was so radiantly fair that no suitor seemed worthy of her. People thronged to see her pass through the city and sang hymns in her praise, while strangers took her for the very goddess of beauty herself. This angered Venus, and she resolved to cast down her earthly rival. One day, therefore, she called hither to her son Cupid and bade him sharpen his weapons. He is an archer more to be dreaded than Apollo, for Apollo's arrows take life, but Cupid's bring joy or sorrow for a whole life long.
Come, Cupid. There is a mortal maid who robs me of my honors in a yonder city. Avenge your mother. Wound this precious Psyche, and let her fall in love with some churlish creature, mean in the eyes of all men.
Cupid made ready his weapons and flew down to earth invisibly. At that moment, Psyche was asleep in her chamber, but he touched her heart with his golden arrow of love, and she opened her eyes so suddenly that he started, forgetting that he was invisible, and wounded himself with his own shaft, heedless of his hurt, and moved deeply by the loveliness of the maiden. He repented himself of the mischief he had wrought, and hastened to pour over her locks the healing joy that he ever kept by him, undoing all his work. Back to her dream the princess went, unshadowed by any thought of love, but Cupid, not so light of heart, returned to the heavenly mount, saying not a word of what had passed. Venus waited long. Then, seeing that Psyche's heart had somehow escaped love, she sent a spell upon the maiden. From that time, lovely as she was, not a suitor came to woo, and her parents, who desired to see her a queen at least, made a journey to the oracle and asked counsel. Said the voice,
"The Princess Psyche shall never wed a mortal. She shall be given to one who waits for her on yonder mountain. He overcomes gods and men."
At this terrible sentence, the poor parents were half distraught, and the people gave themselves up to grief at the fate in store for their beloved princess. Psyche alone bowed to her destiny.
"We have angered Venus unwittingly, and all for the sake of me, heedless maiden that I am. Give me up, therefore, their father and mother. If I atone, it may be that the city will prosper once more."
So she besought them, until, after many unavailing pleadings, the parents consented, and with a great company of people, they led Psyche up the mountain as an offering to the monster of whom the oracle had spoken, and left her there alone. Full of courage, yet in a secret agony of grief, she watched her kindred and her people wind down the mountain path, too sad to look back, until they were lost to sight. Then, indeed, she wept, but a sudden breeze drew near, dried her tears, and caressed her hair, seeming to murmur comfort. In truth, it was Zephyr, the kindly west wind, come to befriend her, and as she took heart, feeling some benignant presence, he lifted her in his arms and carried her on wings as even as a seagull's over the crest of the fateful mountain and into a valley below. There he left her, resting on a bank of hospitable grass, and there the princess fell asleep. When she awoke, it was near sunset. She looked about her for some sign of the monster's approach. She wondered, then, if her grievous trial had been but a dream. Nearby she saw a sheltering forest, whose young trees seemed to beckon as one maid beckons to another, and eager for the protection of the dryads, she went thither. The call of running waters drew her farther and farther, till she came out upon an open place, where there was a wide pool. A fountain fluttered gladly in the midst of it, and beyond there stretched a white palace, wonderful to see. Coaxed by the bright promise of the place, she drew near, and, seeing no one, entered softly. It was all kinglier than her father's home, and as she stood in wonder and awe, soft air stirred about her. Little by little, the silence grew murmurous like the woods, and one voice, sweeter than the rest, took words.
All that you see is yours, gentle high princess. Fear nothing. Only command us, for we are here to serve you.
Full of amazement and delight, Psyche followed the voice from hall to hall and through the lordly rooms, beautiful with everything that could delight a young princess. No pleasant thing was lacking. There was even a pool, brightly tiled and fed with running waters, where she bathed her weary limbs. And after she had put on the new and beautiful raiment that lay ready for her, she sat down to break her fast, waited upon and sung to by the unseen spirits. Surely he whom the oracle had called her husband was no monster, but some beneficent power, invisible like all the rest. When daylight waned he came, and his voice, the beautiful voice of a god, inspired her to trust her strange destiny and to look and long for his return. Often she begged him to stay with her through the day, that she might see his face, but this he would not grant.
Never doubt me, dearest Psyche. Perhaps you would fear if you saw me, and love is all I ask. There is a necessity that keeps me hidden now. Only believe.
So for many days Psyche was content, but when she grew used to happiness, she thought once more of her parents mourning her as lost, and of her sisters who shared a lot of mortals while she lived as a goddess. One night she told her husband of these regrets, and begged that her sisters at least might come to see her. He sighed, but did not refuse.
Zephyr shall bring them hither,
said he. And on the following morning, swift as a bird, the west wind came over the crest of the high mountain and down into the enchanted valley, bearing her two sisters. They greeted Psyche with joy and amazement, hardly knowing how they had come hither. But when this fairest of the sisters led them through her palace and showed them all the treasures that were hers, envy grew in their hearts and choked their old love. Even while they sat at feast with her, they grew more and more bitter, and hoping to find some little flaw in her good fortune, they asked 1,000 questions.
Where is your husband? And why is he not here with you?
All the day long, he is gone, hunting upon the mountains.
But what does he look like?
They asked, and Psyche could not find no answer. When they learned that she had never seen him, they laughed her faith to scorn.
Poor Psyche, you are walking in a dream. Wake before it is too late. Have you forgotten what the oracle decreed? That you were destined for a dreadful creature, the fear of gods and men? And are you deceived by this show of kindliness? We have come to warn you. The people told us, as we come over the mountain, that your husband is a dragon who feeds you well for the present and may face the better someday soon. What is it that you trust? Good words, but only take a dagger some night. And when the monster is asleep, go, light a lamp, and look at him. You can put him to death easily, and all his riches will be yours and ours.
Psyche heard this wicked plan with horror. Nevertheless, after her sisters were gone, she brooded over what they had said, not seeing their evil intent, and she came to find some wisdom in their words. Little by little, suspicion ate, like a moth, into her lovely mind. And at nightfall, in shame and fear, she hid a lamp and a dagger in her chamber. Towards midnight, when her husband was fast asleep, up she rose, hardly daring to breathe, and coming softly to his side, she uncovered the lamp to see some horror. But there the youngest of the gods lay sleeping, most beautiful, most irresistible of all immortals. His hair shone golden as the sun, his face was radiant as dear springtime, and from his shoulders sprang two rainbow wings. Poor Psyche was overcome with self-reproach as she leaned towards him, filled with worship. Her trembling hands held the lamp ill, and some burning oil fell upon Cupid's shoulder and awakened him. He opened his eyes to see at once his bride and the dark suspicion in her heart. "O doubting Psyche!" he exclaimed with sudden grief, and then he flew away out of the window. Wild with sorrow, Psyche tried to follow, but she fell to the ground instead. When she recovered her senses, she stared about her. She was alone, and the place was beautiful no longer. Garden and the palace had vanished with Cupid. Over the mountains and valleys, Psyche journeyed alone until she came to the city where her two envious sisters lived with the princess whom they had married. She stayed with them only long enough to tell the story of her unbelief and its penalty. Then she set out again to search for Cupid. As she wandered one day, travel-worn but not hopeless, she saw a lofty palace on a hill nearby, and she turned her steps thither. The place seemed deserted. Within the hall she saw no human being, only heaps of grain, loose ears of corn half torn from the husk, wheat and barley, alike scattered in confusion on the floor. Without delay, she set to work binding the sheaves together and gathering the scattered ears of corn in seemly wise, as a princess would wish to see them. While she was in the midst of her task, a voice startled her, and she looked up to behold Demeter herself, the goddess of the harvest, smiling upon her with good will.
Dear Psyche, you are worthy of happiness, and you may find it yet. But since you have displeased Venus, go to her and ask her favor. Perhaps your patience will win her pardon.
These motherly words gave Psyche heart, and she reverently took leave of the goddess and set out for the temple of Venus. Most humbly she offered up her prayer, but Venus could not look at her earthly beauty without anger.
Vain girl, perhaps you have come to make amends for the wound you dealt your husband. You shall do so. Such clever people can always find work.
Then she led Psyche into a great chamber heaped high with mingled grain, beans, and lentils, the food of her doves, and bade her separate them all and have them ready in seemly fashion by night. Heracles would have been helpless before such a vexatious task, and poor Psyche, left alone in this desert of grain, had not courage to begin. But even as she sat there, a moving thread of black crawled across the floor from a crevice in the wall, and bending nearer, she saw that a great army of ants in columns had come to her aid. The zealous little creatures worked in swarms, with such industry over the work they liked best, that, when Venus came at night, she found the task completed.
Deceitful girl!
She cried, shaking the roses out of her hair with impatience.
This is my son's work, not yours, but he will soon forget you. Eat this black bread if you are hungry, and refresh your dull mind with sleep. Tomorrow you will need more wheat.
Psyche wondered what new misfortune could be in store for her. But when morning came, Venus led her to the brink of a river and, pointing to the wood across the water, said,
Go now to yonder grove where the sheep with a golden fleece are wont to browse. Bring me a golden lock from every one of them, or you must go your ways and never come back again.
This seemed not difficult, and Psyche obediently bade the goddess farewell, and stepped into the water, ready to wade across. But as Venus disappeared, the reeds sang louder, and the nymphs of the river, looking up sweetly, blew bubbles to the surface and murmured,
Have a care, Psyche. This plant has the gentle ways of sheep. While the sun burns them off, they are themselves as fierce as flame. But when the shadows are found, they go to rest and sleep under the trees, and you may cross the river without fear and keep the golden fleece of the briars in the pasture.
Thanking the water creatures, Psyche sat down to rest near them, and when the time came, she crossed in safety and followed their counsel. By twilight, she returned to Venus with her arms full of shining fleece.
No mortal wit can do this. But if you care to prove your readiness, go now with this little box down to Proserpina and ask her to enclose in it some of her beauty, for I have grown pale in caring for my wounded son.
It needed not the last taunt to sadden Psyche. She knew that it was not for mortals to go into Hades and return alive, and feeling that Cupid had forsaken her, she was minded to accept her doom as soon as might be. But even as she hastened toward the descent, another friendly voice detained her.
Stay, Psyche. I know your grief. Only give ear and you shall learn a safe way through all these trials.
And the voice went on to tell her how one might avoid all the dangers of Hades and come out unscathed.
And be sure, when Proserpina has returned the box, not to open it, however much you may long to do so.
Psyche gave heed, and by this device, whatever it was, she found her way into Hades safely, and made her errand known to Proserpina, and was soon in the upper world again, wearied but hopeful.
Surely Cupid has not forgotten me, but humbled as I am and worn with toil, how shall I ever please him? Venus can never need all the beauty in this casket, and since I use it for Cupid's sake, it must be right to take some.
So saying, she opened the box, heedless as Pandora. The spells and potions of Hades are not for mortal maids, and no sooner had she inhaled the strange aroma than she fell down like one dead, quite overcome. But it happened that Cupid himself was recovered from his wound, and he had secretly fled from his chamber to seek out and rescue Psyche. He found her lying by the wayside. He gathered into the casket what remained of the philtre, and awoke his beloved. Take comfort. Return to our mother and do her bidding till I come again. Away he flew, and while Psyche went cheerily homeward, he hastened up to Olympus, where all the gods sat feasting, and begged them to intercede for him with his angry mother. They heard his story, and their hearts were touched. Zeus himself coaxed Venus with kind words till at last she relented, and remembered that anger hurt her beauty, and smiled once more. All the younger gods were for welcoming Psyche at once, and Hermes was sent to bring her hither. The maiden came, a shy newcomer among these bright creatures. She took the cup that Hebe held out to her, drank the divine ambrosia, and became immortal. Light came to her face like moonrise. 2 radiant wings sprang from her shoulders, and even as a butterfly bursts from its dull cocoon, so the human Psyche blossomed into immortality. Cupid took her by the hand, and they were never parted anymore.